Hello everyone, it's Elena and I'm back with another video, and today I'm going to take you guys through the different steps that I go through in order to prepare for my exams in law school. In this video, I'm going to take you guys through the different steps that I go through for my study routine, so basically from lecture notes up to the exams. First things first, lecture notes. Now, I think you actually do have to go to lectures. I know some people prefer not to go, but personally I think that's bad advice because the lectures lay out the topic for you. They show you what is the most important thing. So they're a great way for understanding the structure of a topic and, just getting a surface level understanding. Personally, I like to take notes on my iPad on GoodNotes while in lectures. I prefer using an iPad because then you have to handwrite, and by that you just avoid writing down everything because I'm someone who can type quite fast. So if you give me the opportunity, I will just write down the entire lecture script, which is not really the point of lecture notes. I do use a little bit of color coding there. If you guys are interested in how I take these lecture notes, I have an entire video on how I make notes on my iPad, which I'm going to link down below, or you can just click on it up here. But basically, I just try to make these as structured as possible and only write down key information, even though it still ends up being quite a lot. I always print them out because I will later on take notes from them, and I find it easier to take notes from a paper version of these notes. Next up are my reading notes. So my reading notes are the notes that I take in preparation for my supervisions. Supervisions are basically like very small seminars and you get assigned a lot of reading for them. So whenever I read these things, I always ask myself, is this really important to note down? Because otherwise you just blindly copy almost the entire text. And when you do need to write it down, ask yourself what you actually need to present this as. So is this best presented as a graph or as a table, or really just this plain text? Now, I do make all of these things on pages, but then I also use GoodNotes for making these graphs. If you guys are interested in how exactly I make these notes, I have a video about laptop note-taking on my channel. This video is really just a concise version of showing you guys how I use my different note sets and how they then all play into my study method. But yeah, I find it really important to just ask yourself about the presentation because that later on makes it easier to study from these things. Also with law, you will sometimes come across a new word, and I know there's a temptation to just quickly put it into Google, but the thing is, Google usually doesn't give you the legal definition because lots of words have a different meaning in a courtroom than they do in normal life. So I would highly recommend investing into a dictionary of law. They're not that expensive, just so that you can look things up. Next, I always read things first and I never take notes on the first read. So when I read through something for the first time, I will annotate, I will maybe highlight a little, but the key thing is I will not take notes on whatever I'm reading for the first time. Because when you're reading something for the first time, everything kind of seems important, but once you've gone through it, you can kind of see what's more important. And I like to use a free post-it method. So I have one post-it which says CR, which stands for currently reading, then another which says notes, so just how far have I taken notes on this, and then one at the end which says NT, which just stands for next target, so that is where I want to get. And by doing that, you can visualize how many pages you have left to take notes on, but also how many pages you have left to read. I find that a really useful way of just seeing how far you already are, and to then kind of visualize your progress in the book. Also, be smart about what you're reading and what you're not reading, because usually the assigned reading contains sections which are irrelevant for you. So go over the headings and look at your syllabus and then decide whether you really need to read everything. And if there's something you don't read, just make a little X next to it so that you don't end up reading it accidentally. It may only spare you a few paragraphs, but that's also some of your time which you can then use for something else. Once you're done with your reading notes, I would once again recommend printing them out and then highlighting them, annotating them. It's really important that you go over them one more time, because just writing things down, that's just the first step. You are quite passive when you're just taking notes, so you need to go over them again and make sure that these things are actually in your head, because otherwise you can't recall them in an exam. So I would highly recommend going over them really after you've made them so that the information is still fresh in your head. Personally, I like to use color coding with my highlighters just to make sure that there's a little bit of structure to it and so that I can see what these things mean. Now, when you're printing things out, it's important that you keep them somewhere where there's structure. So I like to use these folders for my different subjects, and I just try to make sure that everything is in there so that it doesn't fly around my room and gets lost. So for example, here in my international law folder, I have a little world map for orientation, then a general section for information about the course, a lecture section, a supervision section, and then a glossary section, and then also a section for my essays that I write during the term. When you have these folders, the great thing is you can always just take them out and, find everything that you need for a certain topic and nothing gets lost. So in the end, I actually have 3 sets of notes. My lecture notes, my reading notes, and another set of notes, my supervision notes. Supervision notes are basically like meeting minutes because they're just from a conversation that you had with your professor. Now personally, I like to go over these again as well and then highlight a little bit, and I usually bring some questions into the supervision, so I write these at the top and the answers that my teacher gave to me. But they're very, very short and they're just here to clarify some things on the topic and highlight the key things. But then I take these 3 note sets and make my study notes from them. So my study notes are what I put the most effort into, and I make these on GoodNotes, and I try to make them pretty or at least aesthetically pleasing because then I'm more motivated to later on actually look at these. I handwrite them on GoodNotes and I try to visualize as much as I can. I find it really, really useful to handwrite them because then you have a lot of creative freedom with showing different things and explaining things. Personally, I'm someone who learns really well if I visualize something through a graph or something, but also don't waste your time with things that don't actually need to be handwritten, because while it is really, really useful to handwrite things, because when you have something handwritten, it's easier for you to remember it when you learn it from that handwritten thing, but at the same time, not everything needs to be written down by hand, because some things are just easier when you just screenshot them and just put them in. So for example, I am not copying text from statute, so the law itself, but I do use a bit of color coding. So for example, I make all my cases green as I do with highlighting, just to make sure that I can easily see, oh, this is the case. But yeah, basically I just try to make these as pretty as possible. Now we're almost at the final stage, so next I would recommend teaching someone else. So just explain the concept to them so that you can see whether you are clear on it in your head, because when you've really understood something, then you can simplify it so much that someone who is new to the subject can also understand it. So it's a great way of just testing yourself and seeing whether you've actually understood the topic. Okay, so first things first, if the transaction is one which is something that calls for an explanation because it is kind of fishy, then the bank is to be considered to be put on notice, which means they now have to follow the Etridge Protocol in order to still make their mortgage enforceable.
Elena, it's the 15th time you're talking about land law. And sorry, but I can't hear it anymore.
Well, her loss. Anyways, I found myself a new audience. So, moving on, under the Etridge Protocol, the bank has to go through certain steps in order to make their mortgage enforceable. So they have to make sure that the party who is being a guarantor to another private person actually goes and sees a solicitor. Okay, so do you understand the significance of the Etridge Protocol now? Because once you have seen that solicitor and he has explained everything to you and then he tells the bank that he did so, then that's it. Then the bank has done everything they needed to do after they were put on notice by that kind of fishy mortgage application. Do you guys get that? Well, whether or not your cuddly toys get it, the point is, when you're explaining something to someone else, then you have to come up with an easy explanation and you have to make sure that the concept is structured in your head, because otherwise you can't explain it coherently. Let's get to practice questions. Personally, I'm actually not a big fan of practice questions because I write lots of essays and problem questions during the term thanks to the way Cambridge works. So I actually don't write a lot of practice question answers while I'm revising because I've already done that throughout the entire year, which is really great about Cambridge because you get constant feedback. But what I do read about from past exams is examiners' reports. Examiners' reports point out common mistakes that people made, so they're kind of a big warning sign of just, what are the traps that people fell into in these exams. So I think they're really, really useful because they tell you what to look out for. One thing that I also do in order to practice is I write posts on my website about law. Now, I have a legal blog and I don't actually talk about things that are on my syllabus, I just talk about things that I'm interested in. So whether sugar dating is legal or a case that I came across on the BBC. But the thing is, even though these things aren't on my syllabus, they do give me a skill, which is essay writing. And the cool thing is, because I write about things that I'm interested in and not necessarily things I have to write about simply because they're on the syllabus, it doesn't feel like work. It feels more like a hobby, but at the end of the day, I am still actually practicing writing legal essays. So it is a helpful preparation for your exams, even though it has nothing to do with your syllabus. Obviously, it only prepares you for a certain skill, but not for the actual topic itself. And yeah, that's my study routine, from starting out with lecture notes to, at the end, practicing right before the exam. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Bye!